Have you ever felt like the more you try to hold someone close, the further they slip away from you, and then you start asking yourself the same painful questions again and again? Am I not enough? Am I doing something wrong? Why do I feel like I am the only one trying? If you are here listening to this, there is a high chance you are not just in a relationship. You are inside a pattern, a repeating emotional cycle that feels confusing, intense, and deeply personal, but is actually very predictable when you understand it. And here is something most people never realize in time. You are not just dealing with a person. You are dealing with a dynamic, a push and pull system, a closeness and distance loop, a cycle where one person reaches and the other retreats. This is what happens when you are emotionally connected to someone with avoidant tendencies. Not because they are evil, not because you are weak, but because two different emotional survival systems are colliding in the same space. And the most dangerous part is not the distance. The most dangerous part is what it does to your mind while you are inside it. You start to believe that love should feel like effort, that confusion is normal, that anxiety means attachment, that if you just try harder, communicate better, explain more clearly, something will finally shift. But nothing shifts in the way you expect. Instead, you find yourself working harder for something that should have felt natural in the first place. And slowly, without even noticing, your emotional world starts to revolve around one person's availability. When they are warm, you feel alive. When they are distant, you feel like you are losing yourself. And this emotional instability becomes your normal. This is where sabotage begins. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet, almost invisible. You start adjusting your behavior. You start monitoring your words. You start calculating how much to text, when to reply, how long to wait, what mood they are in. You begin to live outside yourself and inside their reactions. And the worst part, you think this is love, but it is not love that is making you anxious. It is inconsistency. Human psychology is built in a way that uncertainty creates obsession. When something is unpredictable, the brain pays more attention to it. It starts scanning for patterns. It becomes hyper-aware. It tries to regain control by thinking more, analyzing more, doing more. So when someone gives you closeness and then withdraws it, your mind doesn't relax. It activates. It starts working overtime. It tries to solve a problem that has no clear solution. And that is how you end up emotionally exhausted while still deeply attached. Because what you are really chasing is not just the person. You are chasing relief. You are chasing the moment where you finally feel secure again, where the anxiety stops, where the silence ends, where you are chosen without hesitation. But here is the truth that most people avoid hearing. You cannot think your way into someone else's emotional availability. You cannot perform your way into consistency. You cannot earn stability from someone whose system is built to protect distance. And yet this is exactly where many people get trapped. They keep giving more energy, more understanding, more patience, hoping that at some point it will finally be returned in the same way. But instead of creating closeness, it often creates pressure. And pressure does not create connection in avoidant dynamics. It creates withdrawal. So now you are not just hurt, you are confused because you are doing everything that should work, but it is making things worse. And that confusion is what keeps the cycle alive. Because when your mind cannot explain something clearly, your emotions take over. And when emotions take over, boundaries disappear. Self-respect gets delayed, needs get minimized. And you start negotiating with your own standards just to keep a connection alive. But before going deeper into how this cycle actually forms and how to break it, there is something important you need to understand about yourself in all of this. You are not crazy for feeling strongly. You are not weak for wanting consistency. You are not too emotional for needing clarity. You are human, and your nervous system is simply reacting to inconsistency the way it is designed to react. And if you stay with this till the end, you will understand something most people never figure out in time. You will see exactly how this pattern traps you, why it feels so hard to leave, and most importantly, how to stop sabotaging your own peace while still staying true to your emotional needs. Because the real change does not start with fixing them. It starts with understanding what this dynamic is doing to you and why you keep getting pulled back into it, even when it hurts. The hardest part of this experience is not the distance itself. It is the way it repeats. It feels like you have already learned the lesson. Yet you find yourself back in the same emotional place again. Different day, same feeling. Different conversation, same confusion, and slowly you start wondering why your heart keeps returning to something your mind already questioned. At first, it does not look like a pattern. It looks like hope. It looks like this time it will be different. It looks like small improvements that make you believe progress is happening. A warmer message here, a softer tone there, a moment of closeness that feels like proof that the connection is still alive. And that is exactly what makes this cycle so powerful. Because the emotional system does not respond to logic, it responds to contrast. When care is inconsistent, even small signs of attention feel extremely meaningful. The brain does not measure how often connection happens. It measures how strong the relief feels when it returns after absence. So when someone moves away and then comes back, your internal world does not register it as instability. It registers it as reward, and that reward becomes emotionally addictive in a very subtle way. You begin to wait for the next moment of warmth, not because you enjoy waiting, but because the waiting makes the arrival feel intense. And without realizing it, your emotional focus shifts from steady connection to unpredictable moments of relief. This is where the hidden pain begins to form, because now your peace is no longer stable. It is conditional. It depends on timing. It depends on mood. It depends on someone else's emotional availability. And that creates a quiet form of internal tension that stays with you even when nothing is happening. You may be sitting in silence, but your mind is not silent. It is scanning. It is remembering the last interaction. It is predicting the next one. It is trying to decode meaning from small signals that would normally not matter in a secure environment. A delayed response becomes a question. A short reply becomes a concern. A warm message becomes temporary relief instead of normal behavior. And slowly, your nervous system starts adjusting to this unstable rhythm. What makes this even more complex is that the good moments do not feel neutral. They feel powerful. When connection returns, it feels like emotional oxygen. And because it feels so relieving, your mind begins to prioritize it above everything else, including your own emotional balance. This is how people start staying in cycles they once promised themselves they would leave, not because they are unaware of the pain, but because the relief still exists in between the pain. And that contrast creates a loop that is difficult to break. You start to remember the moments of closeness more vividly than the moments of distance. Your mind naturally edits the story to protect attachment. It highlights hope. It softens disappointment. It convinces you that the connection is improving even when the overall pattern remains the same. And every time you return to that hope, your emotional investment increases. More time spent, more energy given, more meaning attached. At some point, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like responsibility. Like you are somehow responsible for keeping the connection alive. Like if you communicate better, wait longer, understand more deeply, then the stability you want will finally appear. But what is really happening is not improvement. It is repetition. The same emotional sequence continues to play out, just with slightly different details. Distance, tension, reconnection, relief, then again distance, again confusion, again hope, again emotional spike, over and over. And because the cycle is not dramatic all the time, it is difficult to recognize. It does not always feel like conflict. Sometimes it feels like almost getting what you want. And that almost is what keeps you engaged far longer than obvious rejection ever could. There is also another layer that makes this experience deeply personal. The internal belief that if you finally understand it well enough, you can fix it. So you start analyzing every interaction, every message, every pause, every change in tone. You try to find the hidden rule that will unlock consistency. But the truth is, there is no hidden rule. There is only a pattern. And patterns do not change through deeper analysis alone. They change through recognition and response. But when you are inside the cycle emotionally, recognition becomes difficult because attachment keeps pulling your attention back into hope instead of clarity. This is why people often feel stuck, even when they are intelligent, aware, and emotionally sensitive. It is not a lack of understanding. It is an over-attachment to the possibility of what could be, rather than acceptance of what is repeatedly happening. And the more this continues, the more your emotional identity starts to shift. You begin to associate love with uncertainty. You begin to associate effort with chasing. You begin to associate connection with earning attention instead of receiving it naturally. That internal shift is subtle but powerful, because once your mind adapts to instability, stability can even feel unfamiliar later. Calmness may feel empty. Consistency may feel less exciting. And that creates another layer of confusion that keeps the cycle alive even longer. But beneath all of this, one truth remains constant. Your emotional system is trying to find safety. It is trying to find predictability. It is trying to find peace inside something that keeps changing shape. And until that need is acknowledged clearly, the cycle continues to repeat itself in different forms, with different moments, but the same emotional impact. Understanding this repetition is the first step toward breaking it, because once you see how it forms, you start to realize something important. You are not just reacting to a person, you are reacting to a rhythm, and that rhythm has been shaping your emotions more than you have been shaping it. What makes this situation even more confusing is that it does not always feel like something is wrong. There are moments when everything feels normal again, moments when the tension disappears, even if only briefly. And in those moments, your mind starts to relax. You start thinking maybe you were overthinking before. Maybe it is not as complicated as it seemed. Maybe things are finally settling. But then, without warning, the emotional distance returns. And every time it returns, it does not just bring silence, it brings contrast. Because now you are comparing the calm moments with the disconnected ones. And that comparison creates emotional imbalance inside you. This imbalance is where many people lose their internal grounding. Instead of staying centered in their own needs, they begin adjusting to the emotional weather of the other person. When things are warm, they feel secure. When things become cold, they feel uncertain. And slowly, their entire emotional stability becomes dependent on external behavior. This is not a conscious decision. It happens gradually. One small compromise at a time, one ignored discomfort at a time, one delayed need at a time. And over time, your internal voice starts changing. You begin to justify what you once questioned. You begin to normalize what once felt uncomfortable. You begin to explain away what once felt like a clear signal. This is how self-abandonment develops quietly, not through one big moment, but through many small ones that seem reasonable in isolation. Each moment feels manageable. Each adjustment feels small. But together they create a version of you that is constantly adapting instead of expressing. And the more you adapt, the less you feel like yourself in the connection. You start noticing it in subtle ways. You hesitate before speaking your needs. You choose softer language to avoid distance. You delay expressing discomfort because you are afraid of creating another emotional withdrawal. At some point, you are no longer participating in the relationship as yourself. You are participating as a carefully adjusted version of yourself, designed to maintain access to someone's presence. But here is the difficult truth that slowly becomes clear. When you reduce yourself to maintain closeness, the closeness you receive is no longer real connection. It becomes conditional. It depends on how much you suppress your own emotional truth. And that creates internal conflict, because part of you wants honesty, but another part wants stability. And when those two needs collide, you begin to choose stability at the cost of honesty. You choose peace on the surface while sacrificing peace inside. This internal split is exhausting. You may not even notice it at first, but it shows up in your energy. You feel tired after interactions that should feel simple. You replay conversations in your mind. You question your own reactions. You wonder if you're expecting too much, even when your needs are basic and reasonable. And slowly, your emotional world becomes smaller. You stop expressing fully. You stop asking clearly. You stop expecting naturally, not because your needs disappeared, but because expressing them repeatedly did not lead to consistency. So your mind learns a different strategy. It learns silence, it learns patience beyond comfort, it learns emotional restraint as a form of protection, but that protection comes at a cost. Because when you suppress emotional expression for too long, you do not become calm. You become internally tense. You appear composed on the outside, but inside there is constant activity, a quiet pressure that never fully leaves. This is why even small interactions start to feel significant, because your system is already activated, it is already sensitive, it is already waiting for signs of change. And when those signs do not match what you hope for, the emotional drop feels stronger than it should. This is also where misinterpretation becomes common. Neutral behavior starts to feel like rejection. Delayed responses start to feel intentional. Simple distance starts to feel like emotional withdrawal. not because reality has changed, but because your internal sensitivity has increased. And once this sensitivity is established, every interaction carries emotional weight. Even ordinary moments feel charged, even silence feels meaningful. And that keeps your attention locked in a cycle of interpretation and reinterpretation. Meanwhile, your own emotional needs continue to move further into the background, not because they are unimportant, but because attention is constantly directed outward, towards signals, patterns, timing, tone, behavior. Your awareness becomes focused on reading the other person instead of understanding your own emotional state. And in that shift, something essential gets lost: your internal reference point. Without that reference point, you begin to lose clarity about what is actually acceptable for you. What feels aligned, what feels draining, what feels steady, what feels inconsistent. Everything becomes relative to the last interaction rather than your own standards. This is where emotional confusion deepens, because you are no longer measuring the situation against your needs. You are measuring it against moments of relief. And anything that feels slightly better than the previous discomfort starts to feel acceptable, even if it is still not stable. Over time, this creates a pattern where you accept less emotional presence than you truly need, simply because inconsistency has become familiar. And familiarity can quietly replace clarity. But underneath all of this adjustment, there is still a part of you that recognizes the imbalance, a part that feels the weight of constantly adapting, a part that notices the lack of ease, a part that senses something is not aligned, even if it cannot fully explain why. That internal awareness is important because it means your emotional system has not completely normalized the pattern. It is still responding, it is still signaling, it is still trying to bring attention back to your own experience. And when that awareness starts to surface more clearly, it becomes harder to ignore what has been happening. You begin to see that the issue is not just about communication style or timing, it is about emotional availability not matching emotional investment. And that mismatch is what creates ongoing instability inside you. Once that becomes visible, the cycle cannot remain invisible in the same way. What usually keeps this cycle alive is not only emotional confusion, but the way the mind starts interpreting absence as something personal. When someone pulls away, the first reaction is rarely calm understanding. Instead, the mind tries to assign meaning. It searches for a reason that feels controllable, something to fix, something to adjust, something to improve. And when no clear answer appears, the mind often turns inward. It starts questioning behavior. It starts reviewing conversations. It starts scanning for mistakes that could explain the shift. This is where self-blame quietly enters the picture, not in an obvious way, not as a direct statement, but as subtle thoughts like, "I should not have said that," or "maybe I came across too strong," or "if I acted differently, things would stay steady." And once this internal questioning begins, emotional energy shifts from connection to correction. You stop focusing on how you feel and start focusing on how to prevent loss. That shift is powerful because it changes the entire direction of your attention. Instead of experiencing the relationship, you start managing it. Instead of expressing yourself, you start monitoring yourself. And when someone feels they must constantly manage their own presence in a connection, emotional freedom slowly disappears. But the most misleading part is that effort feels productive. Because every time there is a positive response, even a small one, it feels like confirmation that adjustment is working. That if you just fine-tune your approach, stability will finally remain. So you continue refining, you continue adapting. You continue hoping the next version of your behavior will unlock consistency. Yet the pattern does not stabilize, it repeats. And each repetition strengthens a deeper belief that the outcome depends entirely on your actions. This belief is what keeps many people emotionally invested far longer than they intended to be. Because if you believe you are responsible for the outcome, then leaving feels like failure, and staying feels like responsibility. So you remain inside a situation that drains you, not because you are unaware of the cost, but because you are still searching for control inside it. Meanwhile, the emotional structure of the dynamic continues unchanged. One side reaches when comfort is present. The other steps back when emotional intensity rises. This creates a rhythm that never settles into balance. It stays in motion, never fully stabilizing into mutual ease. And over time, your nervous system begins to adapt to that instability. It stops expecting consistency. It starts preparing for shifts. It becomes alert even during calm moments, because calm no longer guarantees continuity. This internal alertness is exhausting. It keeps your mind slightly tense even when nothing is happening. It prevents full relaxation. It creates a background sense of waiting, as if something could change at any moment. And when the system is in that state for too long, emotional fatigue becomes normal. Not dramatic exhaustion, but a slow, quiet depletion that affects focus, mood, and overall sense of stability. At the same time, another shift begins to form in how you interpret connection. Instead of feeling secure through consistency, you begin to feel attached through intensity. The moments that feel strongest emotionally start to define the relationship more than the steady baseline. So even if most of the time feels uncertain, a few meaningful interactions can outweigh the discomfort, not logically, but emotionally. This is how attachment deepens in unstable environments, not through steady reassurance, but through contrast. And contrast is powerful because it creates memory spikes. The mind remembers emotional highs and lows more vividly than neutral states. So the connection becomes defined by extremes rather than stability. This distorts perception because the absence of consistency gets overshadowed by moments that feel emotionally significant. And those moments become the reason to stay engaged, even when the overall pattern does not support long-term peace. Another important layer is how hope keeps renewing itself. Each time there is a brief return of closeness, it feels like a signal that change is possible. Not necessarily guaranteed, but possible. And possibility is enough for the mind to continue investing. So even after repeated cycles, the emotional system keeps reopening the same expectation that this time something might shift permanently. But without structural change in behavior patterns, temporary closeness does not translate into lasting stability. It only resets emotional anticipation. And that reset is what extends the cycle, because every reset brings fresh motivation to try again, to adjust again, to understand again. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion that is difficult to explain to others, because from the outside, nothing seems extreme at any single moment. There is no constant conflict, no clear breaking point, just ongoing inconsistency, and inconsistency is hard to explain but easy to feel. It is felt in the body before it is fully understood by the mind, in the way thoughts keep circling, in the way calm moments still feel slightly uncertain, in the way emotional peace never fully settles, and eventually a deeper realization starts to form. The issue is not about effort level, it is not about communication style, it is not about finding the right approach. It is about mismatch between emotional openness and emotional protection. One side leans into closeness, the other leans into space, and without alignment, both people experience the connection differently. Understanding this does not immediately end the cycle, but it changes how it is perceived. Because once the pattern is seen clearly, it becomes harder to believe that confusion is necessary for connection.